Welcome back to Arise Prime Time, where we offer perspectives on the news and talking points of the day. I'm Charles Aniegolu. Now, the issues around the state of emergency and the abuse of the Constitution have brought home to many the absolute need in a democracy of a strong and independent opposition, and the disappointment that there doesn't seem to be one. They had the numbers collectively in the National Assembly to stop the approval of the state of emergency and the violation of the Constitution. But they didn't, or perhaps they couldn't, because they were simply too tessellated to come together or too gutless to face up to the APC. So what went wrong? And why should Nigerians trust opposition leaders such as the PDP's Atiku Abubakar and the Labour Party's Peter Obi, who despite their very public condemnation of the imposition of the state of emergency, seemed powerless to get the lawmakers in their parties to vote against it? Well, for more on this, I'm joined now in the studio by the spokesman of the League of Northern Democrats, Dr. Ladan Salihu, who is also a chieftain of the main opposition PDP and a former Director General of the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria, FRCN. Great to see you again.
Good to see you, Charles.
Thank you for coming in. First of all, I suspect you were listening to the previous guest, who is the National Publicity Secretary of the APC, Barrister Felix Morka. Do you accept the reasons he's given justifying the imposition of the state of emergency?
Charles, seriously, I'm scandalized. I'm embarrassed that somebody with the knowledge and the quality of the publicity secretary of the APC, and by his training, and the divine orientation of the legal profession where he came from, for him to come on national television and reel out, simply put, lies. How did we get here? We are better than this as a country. We should be better. We must be better.
Well, he would argue that he's just doing his job.
Yeah, he's doing his job. But if you ask Ladan Salihu to be a spokesperson, to be a spokesman or a publicity secretary of a political party, there are red lines I will never cross. The red lines that touch on our collective integrity as a nation, our unity as a people, and the growth of democracy. There are certain issues that we look at each other and lie. We look at each other and, try to use our own intellectual disposition to twist facts in a manner that we don't serve as people who ordinarily should inspire others into seeking either public office or to be in positions of, publicity mentorship, to be trusted, to be credible, to be credit-worthy, and to be dependable by the people whom you speak to every day on behalf of the party. Look, let's put things straight and be frank about it. This whole issue of the crisis in Rivers State, who started it? Where did it emanate from? What were the reasons or reason? Who were responsible for, the outbreak of this crisis in Rivers State? And we don't want to tell ourselves the truth. One man who completed 8 terms as a governor.
2 terms.
2 terms, rather, as a governor of 8 years. Who was supported by others that preceded him. Who had a structure that brought him on board as a governor. Served his 2 terms, left on a high. Another governor came in, whether that governor is his godson or whether he is the godfather, the supreme law of the Constitution that ushered in a new governor has given Fubara the right and responsibility to govern the state.
He's an executive governor.
And he cannot be governing the state at the whims and caprices, at the beck and call of someone who has finished his tenure. So the crisis, a lot of people are shying away to say the former governor, the present minister of the FCT, is responsible for everything else, everything that has happened in Rivers State. If there wasn't any support for, the lawmakers that defected from the PDP to another party, this crisis wouldn't have been there. And the law, I'm not a lawyer, but it's very clear. If you decamp from a political party, it behoves on the speaker to pronounce your seat as vacant. He did. These are things that are played out in the National Assembly. We've seen it happen severally. So you have a situation in which in Rivers State you have a setup that the law cherry picks. If it favors those if it favors, the assembly and their master, the present FCT minister and his group, it will be done.
But it's really nice, interesting listening to you talk and the forthrightness and the strength of conviction in the things that you say. But then Nigerians will be looking at you, not you in particular, but what you represent, and looking at the APC, and they're thinking, well, what's the difference? Because, your people, members of the PDP, had a chance in the National Assembly to vote against this. Your presidential candidate, the ostensible leader of your party, Atiku Abubakar, came out and condemned the move. As I said, you're a prominent member of the opposition. Were you struck by the absence of opposition voices in that process in the National Assembly? And if so, how much did that worry you? Because this was a sterling opportunity for the opposition to truly play its role, and in doing so, also gain considerable political capital with the Nigerian people.
The Nigerian democracy, I would say, not necessarily the opposition, the whole structure of the political system has lost an opportunity to make history. The National
but
Assembly,
the opposition in particular,
the National,
because you could have,
yes,
you could have tipped the balance.
The National Assembly, Nigerians should crave for and pray for politicians that are elected to carry the integrity of the nation, the green, white, green, as a badge of honor when they are in the National Assembly. What you saw at the National Assembly, and I think that probably made most of the members to stay away, was, it was a contraption, it was a charade, it was pre-arranged, literally.
Well, to be fair, some of the people were already aware.
Well, yes, but then when you look at it, the Constitution is very clear. It says 2/3
indeed
of the majority in the National Assembly, the Senate and the House of Representatives. 2/3 are counted in numbers. They are not counted, it's not a voice call. Our elected representatives or the senators, their constituents would like to see who voted for or against this charade that happened at the National Assembly. And so if you have 40 senators shouting out loud in support of the motion,
it doesn't satisfy that requirement.
It doesn't.
But what I'm interested in knowing is, why didn't members of the PDP, let's not even talking about Labour.
Okay, I'll come
let's
to
not
that.
talk about Labour. Why didn't they do something to make the Nigerian people, beyond the fact that one former governor, who's now a senator, stood up and tried to take on him and was, effectively shouted down. I don't understand why. And there are a lot of questions around whether there were inducements that were offered to members of the opposition to vote with the APC, because even in the context of that voice vote, we didn't hear any nays, did we?
Yes, the problem, first of all, I think a lot of serious-minded, representatives and, members of the National Assembly, they foresaw what was, going to come. And they knew whether or not they were in the chambers, this same result would have obtained anyway. The yes voices would have been pronounced as, the majority voice. What ought to have happened, like I started saying, was to have someone counting, the process of counting, how many senators or members of the House of Representatives voted against. If you had that kind of structure, that kind of observation, then you would have said, okay, the whole outcome was free, fair, and therefore constitutionally oriented. What we saw yesterday was unconstitutional. Yeah, but if you ask me, Charles, yes, if I'll drop the point.
Sure.
What happened yesterday is a nullity as far as the Nigerian Constitution is concerned.
Well, they're going to take it, somebody's already taken it to
the courts. Yes.
But the point I'm making is that people are wondering where the culpability of the opposition comes in here.
Yes.
The reason I say that is that there is an established modus operandi within the National Assembly.
Absolutely.
And the opposition members are well aware of it. They could have moved a motion, which would have been seconded by someone, which would have mandated the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House, or whatever, to have to take action based on that motion. I mean, there's an established procedure. And you would have thought that people in the National Assembly, opposition members, would have said, this is what we're going to do if they do. Because actually, members of that opposition were texting us, texting members of the media in the morning saying, look, they're going to do a voice vote. We think you people should know about this. But then you would have thought that they'd say, okay, if you're going to do a voice vote, this is what we're going to do to counter that. You see what I mean? These are the steps we're going to take, not sort of throw up your arms and say aye when everyone else says
yes,
aye.
I get your question. Look, the way the National Assembly operates, the presiding officer calls the shots. If Charles is the presiding officer, it is his prerogative to identify, recognize, and ask a member or a senator to speak.
Yeah, but they could have moved a motion.
And
he would have been forced to say, is that motion seconded?
A lot less, easier said than done. We have seen, the structure of leadership of the National Assembly. And apart from the, leadership, we have seen a pattern in which the leadership of the National Assembly use or misuse such prerogative in selecting who to speak, in identifying who should speak, and so the opposition is kind of cocooned into a corner,
right,
in a manner that not all the time when they want to make their voices heard that they get recognized. Having said that, yesterday there was a meeting of the all the opposition parties in Eradua Center, and I was there briefly though, and the meeting was happening just at about the same time the
right.
National
you mean
Assembly
the one that was addressed where Atiku Abubakar addressed the press conference.
Why I'm coming, what I want to say is that, look, the opposition can only operate in a manner where you have sanctity, where you have integrity, where you have clarity of purpose, right, and where you have a government at the helm of affairs that is a listening government, that is a government that is willing to take corrections, or that is even willing to give a listening ear.
Well,
look, Atiku Abubakar's speech yesterday at the Eradua Center, and this was an endorsement. This was a speech that was agreed upon by, the opposition parties. It said it all. Look, this beyond Atiku Abubakar, it's beyond the PDP. It's now, the ball is in the court of all Nigerians, you, me, and every voice that must stand for reason, that must stand up for our democracy.
Right.
And let me say this. Look, you have two people fighting, all right? You have Fubara, you have Wiki. You have a federal government in the center that is trying to mediate this crisis or to bring about some, sanity. You punish a governor. You suspend the governor, so to say. You suspend the assembly. You shield and protect Wiki.
Right.
As a government, the federal government should move ahead and suspend, Nyesom Wiki.
Well,
because let me land.
The reason
Charles,
I'm saying that is we're almost out of time.
I want to be very honest with you. Nothing personal against Wiki.
Right.
Nothing personal. We're talking about a democracy here.
Yeah.
If you are able to suspend a governor and set aside a national assembly, what have you done? Right. To Nyesom Wiki, well, he should also step down as the FCT minister.
We've got literally
for the number
2
of
minutes left.
For the number of for the months that Fubara is also serving.
We've got a couple of minutes. I understand that. We've got a couple of minutes. And what I'm keen to know is how much this lack of action on the part of the opposition throws a spanner in the works for you at the League of Northern Democrats that you speak for. How much of a setback is it? Because you're trying to get the opposition together. And I know that there's a trajectory of opposition moves to try and wrest power from the current domain of control. And I wonder what, in that context, you make of the recent moves by Atiku, Obi, El Rufai, and all the rest of them to come together into some sort of coalition, and whether or not you think of them as strange bedfellows.
No, not at all. When it comes to democracy, I think you aggregate the interests. You look at the issues. You try to put together a formula and come up with options. Now, if an option comes from somebody that you don't politically agree, and that option is good enough to go, you set aside your differences, coalesce, and get the job done. So when you see El Rufai and when you see Atiku Abubakar and you see, Fayemi and you see others coming together, it is the singularity of the particularity of their conviction to get Nigeria out of the political doldrum that we are in.
And is the League of Northern Democrats
The League of Northern Democrats, we are making a very, very intellectual analysis of this whole situation. Right. And we're going to come out with a statement that will address a plethora of issues politically, including the one that is unfolding now. Okay. Suffice it to say that the League of Northern Democrats is not particularly happy at the incident, in River State, and that the opposition must roll up its sleeve to make sure that we not only fight for power, but must be seen to be speaking on behalf of Nigerians and to speak truth to power when things are wrong, and to praise power when they do the right things. And
to show fidelity to the rule of law and the Constitution.
You are spot on.
Thank you very much indeed. Dr. Ladan Salihu is a spokesman for the League of Northern Democrats. He's also a chieftain of the PDP, and he's a former Director General of the Federal Radio Corporation of Nigeria. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me, Charles.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow from me and the entire team here in Abuja. Bye-bye, and thank you for watching.